Before we begin, I'd like to ask that we all pause for a brief moment of silence to honor the 45 individuals who died just days ago in Israel in the awful tragedy in Meron. May their memories always be as a blessing. Last year, when we met virtually for the first time, I noted how unique it was and hoped, like all of you, that we'd be back together in person in 2021. Well, as Esther said, a lot has happened since then, and unfortunately, it's still not yet safe for us to convene face to face. But even though we're not in the same room, we are together in our shared mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And despite the challenges of COVID, ADL has not relented one iota in executing our mission. We're responding to anti-Semitic incidents and anti-Jewish sentiment wherever it happens, whether it's vandalism in Riverdale or hateful screeds on Reddit, graffiti in Coral Gables, or deranged anti-Zionism on Clubhouse. And we're calling out those who dismiss this hate, whether in the US or around the world. We're working with law enforcement, not only to pursue hate crimes and the criminals who perpetrate those acts, but to increase their understanding of the relationship with communities they serve and the critical importance of their role as guardians of the Constitution and the rights that it bestows on all Americans, regardless of the color of their skin. We're advocating for changes in federal restrictions to help address the worst refugee crisis since World War II and to ensure those seeking shelter here on our shores are treated with decency and humanity. We're collaborating closely with the Asian American community to help them address not just the recent surge of anti-Asian violence, but with the persistent prejudice that they have faced since Chinese laborers first came to our shores hundreds of years ago. And we're working closely with the federal government to make sure that they attack the scourge of white nationalism and treat it as the national security threat that it is. But I'm encouraged because after 5 years on the defensive, it finally feels like we now have a federal partner fully committed to take on the clear and present danger of domestic extremism. And we're pushing them to adapt many of the planks of our PROTECT plan to prevent and counter domestic extremism, as well as our repair plan to address online hate and harassment, including anti-Semitism, racism, and disinformation. And thanks to your leadership, ADL is meeting the moment and leading on many fronts. For many of us, it feels like we may finally be turning the page. Think about it. For almost half a decade, the central character in our national drama has been reduced to a retiree living in Palm Beach. I wish that this meant the forces of anti-Semitism and hate that he unleashed or that at least refused to condemn would go away, but they haven't. The truth is, anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. Just last week, ADL released our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. We found that 2,024 anti-Jewish acts occurred throughout the US in 2020. While this was a 4% decrease from 2019, it still ranks as the third highest year on record since we began collecting this data in 1979. I'm astonished by these numbers. In a year marked by quarantines and closures and cancellations, I fully expected that we would see a precipitous drop in anti-Jewish incidents from the previous year for the very basic reason that everyone was inside. Instead, it was basically the status quo, as if the new normal we so often feared had finally arrived. Now, we did see a drop in anti-Semitic incidents at schools and universities once COVID hit, but for January and February of last year, we saw elevated levels at K through 12 schools, more so than the previous January and February of 2019. Why was that? I believe it was the bitter fruit of seeds planted in recent years. Because you see, when children see leaders normalizing hate, turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism, using anti-Jewish imagery and tropes, it has an impact. Just look at alarming new research out of Tufts and Harvard, published last month. They conducted a survey last November of thousands of Americans, but concentrated on young people. The researchers found, in their own words, quote, that the anti-Semitism that has been on prominent display in white nationalist protests is not merely confined to a tiny group of activists. Anti-Semitic attitudes appear quite common among young conservatives, and much more so than older conservatives or even liberals of any age. And again, this research came out of Tufts, my alma mater, where hyper-progressive anti-Israel activists have run amok on the campus for years, their anti-Semitism barely disguised as so-called anti-Zionism. In full view of the administration, they've mocked, marginalized, and maligned Jewish students, targeted Hillel for its so-called complicity in quote-unquote Israeli war crimes, pushed for BDS votes on Jewish holidays, and the list of offenses goes on. And yet I will argue strongly here today that anti-Semitism is not a political issue. We all lose when partisans and pundits with their agendas try to cram anti-Semitism onto some antiquated two-dimensional political spectrum, as if the rest of us have to view anti-Jewish hate in a lens formulated by cable news bookers. Look, that might be good for their ratings, but it's inadequate for all of us in real life. And well, I'm sorry, but I'm not more worried about anti-Semitism from the right or more alarmed about anti-Semitism from the left. I'm concerned about all of it because anti-Semitism is the original pandemic, one that too often evades early detection, one that mutates and adapts to new climates, and a disease that ultimately threatens all of us equally, even if some hosts are more prone to carry it. However, this is what worries me. There are a large number of Americans who today are so warped by our polarized politics, they don't see hate if it interferes with their own ideology. And then there are some who simply don't share the widely held belief that anti-Semitism is just plain wrong. They can log on to a variety of websites or social media platforms that reinforces this belief. Or they can just tune in to one of the main news channels in our country. Less than 1 month ago, on his primetime program on Fox News, Tucker Carlson openly endorsed the white supremacist Great Replacement theory. If you haven't heard of it, this is the virulently racist and anti-Semitic conspiracy that holds that a secret group of Jewish people are plotting to flood the United States with non-whites and immigrants in order to commit white genocide. It's not a new idea. In fact, it's a long-standing, toxic staple of white supremacist ideology. It's so odious that it was one of the reasons that the House Republican caucus stripped one of its members who supported it of any committee assignments in the last Congress. And yet, the host of the most watched cable news show in America, Tucker Carlson, asserted that this is exactly what's happening in America today. Now, I don't need to tell you how ugly this rhetoric is, especially when it's repeated by someone with millions of viewers across the country. But it's also dangerous, literally a prompt to violence. In 2017, when the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville were chanting, "Jews will not replace us," they chose those words for a reason. Extremists invoked replacement theory when they massacred 11 Jewish worshipers in a synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018, 51 Muslims at 2 mosques in Christchurch the following year, and 22 Latinos in a parking lot of a Walmart in El Paso that same year. So make no mistake, this is a deeply dangerous message. Now, immediately after the segment, we reached out to the network with a simple appeal. This was far from his first offense, and it was time for Tucker to go. The response that I received back from Fox CEO Lachlan Murdoch could be summarized as follows. "We respect you and the ADL, but Tucker didn't really mean it. He was talking about voting rights, not invoking a white supremacist trope." Now, not only was this not true, it was an assessment totally ignored by those who know replacement theory the best, the neo-Nazis and white supremacists who embrace it. How do we know? We track them on their message boards. We monitor them in their online groups, and they were jumping for joy that Carlson said what he did, and then doubled down on the idea. One said, and I quote, "Tucker Carlson finally struck back against the Jews on Monday, dropping the ultimate truth bomb on his audience. You see, this is how hatred is being mainstreamed in America in 2021. By TV hosts spewing it, their executives making excuses for it, and the rest of society, by and large, shrugging their shoulders and moving on to the next news cycle. But make no mistake, this normalization of hate, it's not just a Jewish issue. It's not just a Latino issue or a Black issue or an Asian issue. This is an American issue. Despite what Carlson and his ilk might say, to be an American doesn't mean having a certain skin color or adhering to a certain religion or being born on our shores. America is an idea. It is a nation built around a powerful set of principles about liberty, equality, and democracy, around the notion that anyone can come join us. True, America has struggled over its history to live up to these ideals, and we remain an imperfect union. But through that struggle, we strive to be and are better for it. That's not a partisan statement, it's who we are. It's the fight we are in when we battle anti-Semitism, extremism, and hate. That's why, as happened after the Carlson incident, I frequently get texts and calls from self-identified Republicans, people who have donated tens of thousands of dollars over the years to conservative causes. And they reach out to tell me that they are worried about the future of their party and the direction our country is headed in. But thankfully, some are speaking out. Since he left office in 2009, President George Bush has kept with decades of tradition and generally refused to criticize his successors in either political party. Yet last month, coincidentally, just as Carlson was going on and on about replacement theory and the immigrants who will take over America, President Bush published an op-ed in the Washington Post about immigration and its sanctity. The occasion was the publishing of his new book called Out of Many, One. It's a series of stories and portraits about great Americans today who are immigrants. And he wrote, I hope that these faces and the stories that accompany them serve as a reminder that immigration isn't just a part of our heritage. New Americans are just as much a force for good now with their energy, idealism, and love of their country as they have always been. What a powerful rebuke of the replacement theorists and the nativists. What a strong statement from the only Republican since Ronald Reagan to be elected twice to the presidency. It reminded me, I think it reminded all of us, that we can argue over our policies, but the principles we share run deeper, that we can have heated political debates, but we can't let the values that underpin them become obscured. His words gave me confidence in the mission that we're on here at ADL. His leadership and his views give me hope that even if I don't agree with all of his policies, that working together, I know we can turn back the tide of hate. I draw hope every time other principled leaders speak out publicly to stop the normalization of anti-Semitism and hate. Every time a company joined our effort to get social media platforms to stop supporting hate online. Every time an ally like the NAACP or the Urban League or Unidos or LULAC joined us in the fight. And what gives me hope ultimately is all of you. That you are taking the time out of your busy lives, work and family and all the commitments, to volunteer and help ADL do our work. From those of you who are veterans of these causes and have worked with us for decades, to the latest entrants in our Glass Leadership Institute, who may be just starting to take on leading roles in our organization. I know that we can fight anti-Semitism and bigotry. I'm confident that we can reestablish the norm that hate has no place in the United States. And I'm certain we can do this because of the dedication and commitment of each and every one of you. It energizes and inspires me every single day. Thank you, and have a great National Leadership Summit.